Please note, this is a British period crime drama TV series set in Birmingham, which tells the story of the ruthless actions of the blood-soaked Peaky Blinders gang after World War I. This fictional gang is loosely based on a real youth gang that was active in Birmingham from the 1880s to the 1920s. The thrilling content is absolutely not to be missed. Let's enjoy this British gangster drama, Peaky Blinders, together. In Birmingham, chaos is decided by the Razor Gang, with sharp, angular faces and dressed in sharp suits. He is the leader of the Razor Gang, Tommy Shelby. They sew razor blades into the brims of their flat caps. Using brutal methods, one strike and their enemies are left bloodied and scarred. That's how the gang got its nickname Razor Gang. If you dare stir trouble on Tommy's turf, meeting God is your only way out. However, this peaceful town suddenly receives an important visitor one day. He is Billy Kimber, the boss of the Birmingham racetrack. Due to the Shelby family's involvement in horse racing manipulation, Billy goes straight to their doorstep to confront them. Despite this, the Shelby family doesn't take Billy seriously. Seeing Billy storm off in anger,
"I am Billy Kimber! I run the races, and you fixed one of them, so I'm gonna have you shot against a post."
Tommy quickly called out to stop him. Tommy hands him the bullet from the Lee family, who had declared war on him, because Tommy knows that the Lee family has been robbing his racetrack, and he hopes Billy will let him take charge of security at his racetrack. But to Tommy's surprise, Billy refuses without a second thought. In his eyes, gypsies are not worthy of working with him. Even so, Tommy is not about to give up, because the only way to expand the family's influence is through Billy in securing the legitimate racetrack license. But did Tommy really manipulate the races, as Billy claimed? To understand this, we have to go back to 2 days ago. In 1919, in Birmingham, England, a group of young gypsies established a gangster family here. Since the family members liked to sew razor blades into the brims of their hats, the locals started calling them the Razor Gang. On this particular day, Tommy rode into Chinatown on his black horse. Soon, a Chinese man walked up with a little girl. The girl stepped forward and performed what the locals believed to be Eastern magic on the horse. Normally, people would do this quietly, but Tommy didn't hide it at all, because his purpose was to use the local superstitions to make people believe that this horse would surely win. Though he profited from it, Tommy's actions angered his older brother, Arthur. Facing his brother Arthur's criticism,
"We don't mess with Chinese.
Look at the book.
Chinese have cutters of their own."
We agreed, Arthur. I'm taking charge of drumming up new money.
You think we can take on the Chinese and Billy Kimber?
Tommy didn't accept it. During the family meeting, their roles had already been assigned. Arthur was responsible for internal affairs, while Tommy was in charge of expanding new business. But now Arthur is afraid that the racetrack owner, Billy, will find out about the horse race manipulation and wrongly blame him. On the other side, because of the rampant gang power in Birmingham, the authorities specially appointed a new sheriff to clean up the law and order here. As the saying goes, a new official always sets fires. The appointed sheriff, Campbell, was no exception. After understanding the distribution of local powers, Campbell decided to select a scapegoat from among these forces, and that scapegoat was the Shelby family. Campbell first instructed his men to inspect all the entertainment venues in town, but he deliberately spared the Razor Gang's pub, making the other factions believe that the Razor Gang had already been pacified by the government, causing them to turn on each other. Once both sides had weakened each other, he would step in to take control. On the other side, Tommy learned through his informants that Campbell had targeted their family, so he urgently called a family meeting. He instructed his men to compensate all the pubs that Campbell had damaged. Then, he bought up all the king's portraits from the villagers' homes and gathered them in the town square to burn them. He also invited reporters to cover the event, spreading the story that the residents of Birmingham didn't disrespect the king, but that the new sheriff had been too oppressive, forcing them to set the fire as a warning. Tommy's move was very effective. After the reporters' biased coverage, the higher-ups quickly called Campbell, instructing him to temporarily halt his actions and wait until public sentiment calmed down before resuming the investigation in a more orderly manner. If the situation escalated and reached the king, it could damage the royal family's image. Although Campbell was unwilling, he had no choice but to obey his superiors. Just like that, with Tommy's simple tactics, he not only dealt with Campbell's threat but also earned the favor of other local criminal factions. However, Tommy overlooked one thing. His manipulation of the horse races had already been discovered by the racetrack boss, Billy Kimber. The two men are playing a coin toss game, with the stake being a carriage. When Tommy lost, his older brother Arthur loudly proclaimed, I knew you'd lose. You idiot. But Tommy says, I won, because before the game started, he had already promised that if the other man lost, he would let him take a ride in the carriage. Arthur was relieved and kept saying that was good, but Tommy's words caused the other 3 men to laugh at him. Seeing someone insult his mother, Tommy was overcome with rage. He ripped off his hat, which was sewn with razor blades, and swung it straight at the man who had spoken. In an instant, blood splattered everywhere. The other members of the Shelby family also took off their caps and joined the fight. After Arthur knocked one of the men down, the third brother, John, shoved the razor blade part of his cap into one of the man's mouth. In no time, the Shelby brothers had knocked out the 3 men who had been laughing just moments before. After leaving the fight, Tommy and the others returned to the pub to discuss family business. But just then, the pub doors were pushed open, and a man with a handlebar mustache holding a gun, along with a group of men, stormed in. The man was Billy Kimber, the local leader of the largest gang. He came here to ask Tommy how he planned to handle the secret manipulation of his racetrack. Tommy, however, remained calm and composed. He told Billy, your racetrack is currently being harassed by the Lee family, and just half an hour ago, I dealt with their men, so we can work together. But Billy didn't think much of the Razor Gang. He told Tommy, no one works with me, you can only work for me. Then, he casually tossed a coin on the floor and ordered Tommy to pick it up. Seeing his brother humiliated, John wanted to take action, but Tommy stopped him. Then, Tommy bent down and picked up the coin. Billy, realizing that a man who could endure such humiliation was no ordinary person, left the pub with his men. After Billy and his crew had gone, Tommy locked the door and told his brother, fix your hair. Tomorrow, we're going to the racetrack. In order to gain the approval of the gang leader Billy Kimber, the Shelby family went all out. John saw his nephew holding a small knife and quickly handed him a large machete. In the Shelby family, only women would use small knives. Once everything was ready, they climbed into their car and set off for their destination. Since the Lee family had bribed the security team at Billy's racetrack, their men were stealing and causing havoc inside the racetrack. Tommy had sent Arthur to deal with these men to prove his strength and force Billy into cooperating.
I commandeer this stolen money by order of the Peaky blinders.
Rescued from the Lee brothers and returned to you with a request for a fair hearing. Your own protection is failing, Mr. Kimber. Your boys are taking cuts. I want to suggest that from now on, you contract out your racetrack security to the Peaky blinders.
Tommy told Billy, your security team is incompetent, and the management has been bribed by the Lee family. But we, the Razor Gang, can help you solve this problem. All we ask for in return is 5% of your racetrack profits each month, and control over the results of 3 races. Billy was somewhat intrigued by Tommy's offer. After thinking for a moment, he added an additional condition. Tommy's dance partner, Grace, had to spend 2 hours alone with him. To seal the deal with Billy, Tommy found Grace and said, didn't you want to join the Razor Gang? After the ball, go with Billy to his mansion a few miles away and stay with him for 2 hours. I'll pay you extra for it. Grace was half chilled when she heard Tommy say that. After giving Grace her task, Tommy went to Billy and told him everything was sorted. You can take her now. Billy, seeing Tommy's sincerity, agreed to let Tommy take his dance partner, 2 hours, and then you can bring her back to the mansion to swap out. With that, Tommy drove the car and brought Billy's dancer to a wooded area near the villa. They sat in silence, neither of them looking at the other. Tommy just wanted the time to pass quickly. Inside the mansion, Grace tried to pull out a revolver hidden in her wallet, but Billy threw a crystal glass on the floor, demanding that Grace pick it up. Grace refused and told him to pick it up himself. Billy, enraged by Grace's defiance, shouted, "You're just a barmaid. How dare you disobey me?" He rushed over, pinned Grace against the pool table, and prepared to use force to take advantage of her. At that critical moment, the door was suddenly flung open. Tommy stormed in with the woman. He told Billy, "I know there's still an hour left, but there's something I have to tell you."
But she has the clap. Call it my better nature.
Tommy used a guilty conscience as an excuse to deceive Billy, then drove away with Grace.
Why did you change your mind, Thomas?
Thanks to the deal with Billy, the Razor Gang made a fortune and also received the coveted racetrack license. This meant the Razor Gang was officially clean, with their activities legitimized. Just as they were celebrating their newfound success and bright future, they overlooked another enemy, the Lee family. The Razor Gang was the one that drove the Lee family out and took their place at Billy's racetrack. which led to where they are today. But the Lee family, as an old power in Birmingham, would never let them off so easily. While Tommy and the others were away at a meeting, the Lee family saw an opportunity and raided their casino. They also planted a bomb on Tommy's car. Watching the exploding hand grenade, Tommy pondered deeply. Thinking of the family's future, he ordered someone to raise a white flag and head to the Lee family's stronghold. Tommy's goal was to seek a truce. He told Zilpha, the leader of the Lee family, "You sent a few kids to try and kill me with a bomb, but it didn't work." I, Tommy, the leader of the Razor Gang, was ready to die on the streets from the start, but those kids were innocent. If you insist on continuing this vendetta, be prepared for mutual destruction. Of course, I'm here to propose a cooperation. Zilpha, hearing Tommy talk about cooperation, asked, "Aren't you already working with Billy? Are you trying to play both sides?" Tommy replied, "I can betray him anytime. Billy has no grand ambitions. What I need are smart allies to strengthen my power, and then I'll find a way to take his place." Zilpha was somewhat tempted, but she felt uneasy about Tommy's behavior of betraying his allies. Tommy seemed to sense her hesitation. "Don't worry, I have a way to make the alliance unbreakable." To take revenge for the Lee family's raid on the casino, Tommy took his crew to their base. As they neared the gunshot range, Tommy didn't stop. John quickly warned his brother. However, the others surrounded John, pulling flowers out of their pockets.
"What's she bloody doing, Tommy?"
There's a girl in the Lee family who's gone a bit wild, and she needs marrying. Listen to me. A girl who needs a husband, a man who needs a wife. So if you back out now, there's going to be one mighty war breaking out here that's going to make the Somme, it's going to make the Somme look like a tea party.
In order to avoid a war, John had no choice but to agree. Seeing John's stoic face, his two brothers quickly reassured him, saying, "The bride's father plans to give you a big car." And John finally cracked a small smile. After passing Zilpha's beauty test, the bride, Esme, was brought to the wedding venue. Tommy took the toothpick from John's mouth and said, "The bride shouldn't be over 50 years old." John, filled with anxiety, knelt before the priest. As the bride lifted her veil, John's gaze locked onto her, and his lips curved into a smile. Seeing his brother's expression, Tommy knew John was very pleased with his new bride. The priest then took a knife and made a small cut in the palms of both the groom and the bride. They then pressed their bloodied hands together, officially binding them as husband and wife. The celebration began, and both families danced around the bonfire, letting loose in joyous revelry. The next day, Tommy gathered all the members of his family. Due to his marriage alliance with the Lee family, he now has enough power to challenge Billy Kimber and become the new ruler of the Birmingham area. But just as they were preparing to fight Billy with legitimate means, the youngest brother, Finn, burst into the room and said, "Billy's coming," with 2 truckloads of men, armed and heading for the bar. Tommy knew that calling for reinforcements at this point would be too late, but running away was not in the Shelby family's blood. He decided to face Billy head-on. Tommy and a few key men from the bar prepared to go into battle. Despite the massive difference in manpower and weaponry, the faces of the Razor Gang showed no fear, because they understood the significance of this fight. On the other side, Campbell learned that 2 factions were about to clash to decide the new ruler. He told his men to stay out of it. Let them weaken each other first, then we'll come in to finish them off. In the final moments, Tommy stared at Billy and asked, "Do you really want to play it this way?" Billy then said, "It's because my gun's better. Today, I'm taking over here," but the next second,
Reporting for duty, sir. You were saying something about being outgunned.
After shooting Billy dead, Tommy told Billy's men, "This was a one-on-one duel between me and Billy. Now that Billy's dead, you can all go home." Billy's men, seeing Tommy take a bullet and act as if nothing had happened, were filled with fear. They had no choice but to drag Billy's body and leave. Once the dust settled, Tommy returned to the bar, where his men helped him remove the bullet from his wound. To prevent infection, Arthur poured a bottle of strong liquor directly onto Tommy's injury. Once Tommy had his wound bandaged, the group went to a room to pray for Danny, who had fallen in the war. They all agreed that Danny would be buried in the family's old cemetery, but as Danny's body was being hauled away in a truck, Tommy's face showed signs of sorrow. For men like them, always living on the edge of death, they never knew when someone close might be taken. This thought led Tommy to a new idea, to go legitimate. to enter high society. Only this way could he ensure a stable life for everyone in his family, and the only place to make that happen was at the heart of power, London. In 1919, Birmingham, a family called the Shelbys became the new rulers of the area after gunning down the leader of the biggest criminal organization, Billy Kimber, during a gunfight. However, the head of the family, Tommy Shelby, wasn't satisfied. Despite opposition from other family members, he decided to take on the local power in London. To avoid getting tangled in constant minor troubles, Tommy decided to go after the biggest force in town. One night, Tommy, along with his two brothers, walked into Darby Sabini's bar. After a huge commotion, Tommy's brother Arthur announced the Razor Gang's purpose for being there. The Shelby brothers wanted to use this operation to intimidate them, but they underestimated Sabini's capabilities. After learning that an outside force had caused trouble at the bar, Sabini, with his men, took advantage of Tommy being alone and gave him a severe beating, even pulling out one of Tommy's teeth. Then Sabini raised his pistol and was about to send Tommy to meet Jesus. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, Sheriff Campbell arrived with a group of men and saved Tommy. The next day, when Tommy woke up in the hospital, Campbell told him that, as a reward for saving him, the higher-ups had tasked him with assassinating a general who advocated for the separation of Ireland. Tommy, knowing his influence was still limited, didn't immediately reject Campbell's offer, but he also didn't give a full agreement. Once Tommy recovered and was discharged from the hospital, he went to meet Alfie Solomons, the leader of the second-largest gang in London. Tommy's purpose in meeting Alfie was to discuss a possible alliance against the powerful Sabini. However, Alfie was hesitant. The Razor Gang had a terrible reputation in the area, and he was wary of aligning himself with them. Tommy explained, "You get 2/10 of your profit from the distillery and protection fees. The other 8 out of 10 comes from the racetracks. Sabini is already trying to close the bars that sell your distillery's liquor, and soon he'll be encroaching on the racetracks too. If you're willing to cooperate, I can provide you with 100 men. Alfie was intrigued by Tommy's offer. He replied, "If you want me to cooperate, then help me open up the foreign trade routes for my distillery." Tommy didn't agree immediately because exporting liquor required an export license, which he couldn't obtain at the moment. So, their first attempt at cooperation ended in failure, but Alfie's request made Tommy realize the importance of foreign trade. When he got home, Tommy immediately wrote a letter to Campbell's superior, "Churchill, I can help you assassinate the Irish general, but in return, I want a legitimate export license." Campbell was not pleased with Tommy's demand, but Churchill assured him that it was a minor issue.
His demands, by comparison, are slight and easily met with a few quiet words over lunch with the appropriate ministers, sir.
Meanwhile, due to the new cabinet minister's plan to clean up local entertainment venues, Tommy had to select a scapegoat to send to prison in order to help the police complete their task. But who should he choose? This question weighed heavily on Tommy's mind. This is a poor boy. Because he couldn't get enough to eat, he decided to become the scapegoat for the Razor Gang. When Tommy saw the Digbeth Kid's outfit, he asked if he liked watching cowboy movies. The Digbeth Kid smiled slightly and lifted his coat to show Tommy, but this startled Arthur and John. The Digbeth Kid quickly explained, "It's made of wood." Tommy, curious, pulled out the wooden gun from the Digbeth Kid's waistband. In the end, Tommy chose the Digbeth Kid for the task, offering him £5 as a reward. In a time when half the population couldn't afford food, this was considered a substantial amount of money. The Digbeth Kid was then sent to the police station, where the officers took his confession and locked him up for illegal gambling. In the dark, damp cell, the Digbeth Kid sat wrapped in a tattered burlap sack, nervously fidgeting, just as he was drifting off to sleep, dreaming of reuniting with his family. 2 burly men stormed in and began to beat him without saying a word. One of the men then held a knife to the Digbeth Kid's throat, saying, "This is the fate of anyone who dares come to Green Prison from the Razor Gang." The Digbeth Kid begged for mercy, claiming it was all an act, but it was to no avail. His throat was mercilessly slit, and he collapsed into a pool of blood. When Tommy heard that the Digbeth Kid had been killed in prison, he was furious. He urgently called for a family meeting. To restore their reputation, Tommy ordered his men to use their connections to get into the prison and take out the killers. Then, he told his brother Arthur to take a group of men and exact revenge at Sabini's bar. These were 2 boys who had just returned from abroad, wanting to experience the adult world. They went to a bar for a drink. A bartender approached and told them they weren't welcome, then proceeded to beat them badly. This frightened the bar's owner. When the bartender heard that one of the boys was Polly Shelby's son, he immediately froze. He hurriedly apologized and left the bar. Just when it seemed like the matter was over, Michael went home and was spotted by his cousin Arthur, who noticed the bruises on his face. Michael reluctantly explained what had happened at the bar. So, Arthur, with a few men, arrived at the bar where Michael had been beaten. They beat up the owner and the bartender before setting the bar on fire, reducing it to ashes. Meanwhile, Sabini approached Alfie and said, "The Razor Gang is growing stronger. Before long, they'll threaten both our positions. If we join forces now, we can wipe them out for good, and you'll be able to regain control of the racetrack business." Alfie, fully aware of how profitable the racetrack business was, agreed to Sabini's plan without hesitation. The next day, under the guise of a dinner, he invited Arthur to meet with him. The unsuspecting Arthur thought Alfie wanted to discuss a partnership, so he kept thanking him enthusiastically at the banquet. But suddenly, the situation took a dark turn. Arthur's companion was shot dead, and Arthur was knocked out with a blow from a club. Then, Alfie called in the police, claiming that while they were eating, Arthur burst in with a gun and shot dead his associate. To protect himself, Alfie and his men were forced to tie Arthur up. Just like that, the second in command of the Razor Gang was locked up for murder. On the other side, Sabini used the incident where Arthur burned down the Marquee Bar to capture Polly Shelby's son, Michael. Upon hearing that both his brother Arthur and Michael had been arrested, Tommy rushed to find Sheriff Campbell, telling him that he had figured out how to carry out the assassination of the general. However, since it was a covert mission authorized by Sir Churchill, Tommy needed someone he could trust completely. Campbell knew Tommy was referring to Arthur, though he was extremely reluctant. He had no choice but to agree in order to complete the mission assigned by Churchill. But Polly, desperate to save her son, went to Campbell without informing Tommy. Polly had intimate relations with Campbell in exchange for her son Michael's freedom. The second in command of the Razor Gang was tougher than anyone realized. Even when he was in severe pain, he could immediately recover his composure and hide a spoon when someone walked in. Seeing that Arthur had finally been released, Tommy told him, "Today, we're going to settle everything with Sabini once and for all." After briefing him on the details, Tommy and one of his men went to meet Alfie. Since Sabini's hold on the local area was so strong, Tommy knew that in order to take him down completely, he needed Alfie's help. However, after their previous failed negotiations, Alfie had lost his patience with Tommy. He made a bold demand. "If you want my cooperation, you'll have to hand over control of all the Razor Gang businesses to me." Tommy, of course, could never agree to such a demand. He had come prepared with a backup plan. Although Alfie was initially skeptical, he became genuinely frightened when Tommy took out a grenade pin. In the end, Tommy and Alfie agreed on a 35% share of the profits for their cooperation. Then Tommy, with his men standing at the gate, headed to their designated meeting spot. Tommy informed the family members that at 3 p.m., a body would be discovered at the racetrack. All the security guards would be sent to protect the king, and that would be the perfect opportunity to rob the racetrack of all its money and destroy the operating license. Then, Tommy asked his brother John to distribute the money to everyone, assuring them that there would be even greater rewards once the job was done. The men eagerly cheered. After rallying the troops, the Razor Gang split into groups and infiltrated the racetrack. Arthur and John were tasked with keeping an eye on Sabini, while Tommy took on the job of tracking down an Irish field marshal, Russell, who advocated for a split. Churchill had ordered Tommy to assassinate him. However, while Tommy was looking for the right moment to strike, Grace approached him and revealed that she was pregnant. Tommy was stunned, but Tommy had no time to think about these things now, because while he was talking to Grace, Russell had already gathered with other officers. It seemed that if he wanted to kill Russell, he would have to use some special methods. Lizzie, dressed in high-end fashion, suddenly took off her shoes in front of everyone, catching the attention of a man in a military uniform across from her. Before long, a string of numbers appeared on the bottom of Lizzie's shoe. Russell grew excited when he saw it. He knew it was a signal for a rendezvous. Seeing that Russell had taken the bait, Lizzie picked up her purse and left the restaurant. Russell quickly said goodbye to his companions and followed her out. But he forgot one crucial thing: lust can cloud a man's judgment. As they were preparing for a more intimate moment in the restroom, Tommy rushed in and shot Russell in the head, killing him instantly. It turned out that about an hour earlier, Tommy had instructed Lizzie to dress in an elegant outfit to use her charms and lure Russell into a private meeting. Tommy had worried that Russell wouldn't fall for it, but it seemed he had overestimated the man's intelligence. Tommy fired 3 shots into the air and then calmly approached the security guard at the door, telling him that a military officer had been killed in the restroom. Once the guard confirmed that Tommy wasn't lying, he immediately sounded the alarm, causing all the security personnel to rush toward the king. Meanwhile, Arthur saw that the time had come. He led the family in attacking Sabini's men, stealing all the money from the racetrack, and burning the operating license in the process. Sheriff Campbell was in the phone booth, notifying officers outside, but as soon as he looked up, he saw Polly. Campbell assumed Polly wanted another intimate encounter, so he eagerly welcomed her inside. But in the next second, Polly shot him in the heart, avenging the humiliation she had suffered. Seeing that everything was going according to plan, Tommy approached Sabini and casually said, "My boys just had a little bonfire, and unfortunately, they accidentally burned your racetrack's operating license. My apologies." Upon hearing that the license had been burned, Sabini immediately reached for his gun, ready to kill Tommy. Tommy remained calm and unshaken, telling Sabini, "If you shoot me now, the guards outside will think you're trying to assassinate the king." Sabini thought Tommy might have a point, but then he suddenly grabbed a beer bottle, smashing it to pieces. Hearing the noise, the guards outside quickly rushed in. Tommy quickly reassured them that it was just a minor issue, but to his surprise, the guards immediately seized him, and Sabini's face broke into a smile. Tommy finally realized that these guards were Sabini's assassins in disguise, and the beer bottle was a signal. He had meticulously planned every step, but had underestimated this one crucial detail. The killers then dragged Tommy to an open field. Looking at the large pit in front of him, Tommy knew it was meant for his grave. He slowly walked toward the hole prepared for him, bitter but resigned. What use was his frustration now? Just as Tommy was about to say goodbye to the world, one of the assassins suddenly turned and killed the other two. Tommy was also shocked by this sudden turn of events, but the man told him that he was sent by Churchill and had another task for him, so Tommy couldn't die yet. Upon hearing this, Tommy didn't say a word. He climbed out of the pit and stumbled forward. The events that had just transpired left Tommy shaken. It wasn't the fear of death that haunted him, but the fear of losing the familiar faces around him. Meanwhile, at the Razor Gang bar, everyone was celebrating. They had made a huge profit from the racetrack victory, but no one mentioned why Tommy wasn't present. In their eyes, Tommy Shelby was like a god. Otherwise, how could he have turned a small, marginalized force into the third largest gang in the country? What they didn't realize, though, was that after everything Tommy had just gone through, his ambitions had already begun to shift.
I'm planning on getting married.
Just how wealthy is Tommy Shelby? Under circumstances where half the country was going hungry, he not only owned 4 luxury cars for getting around but also bought a large villa for each family member. And when he spends money, he doesn't hide it, because he also has 28 armored vehicles ready to move money at any time. Under his leadership, the Razor Gang had become the largest criminal organization in Britain in just 2 years, and today was the day he was getting married. In an effort to make a good impression on his wife's family, Tommy set down some ground rules for his own family. With the wedding banquet going perfectly, and everyone caught up in the festivities, Tommy took his brother outside, because that night, he was secretly negotiating the purchase of 27 tanks with a Russian duke. But when they arrived, they realized the signal wasn't right, so Tommy had Arthur take care of the situation. Soon after, the duke's niece, Tatiana, found Tommy. She had learned that news of the tank deal had leaked, and she urged Tommy to find the leak quickly. She also handed over a deposit for the deal. Tommy wasn't particularly concerned about who had leaked the information, because what mattered most to him now was completing the deal with Grand Duke Leon Petrovna. So, the next morning, Tommy went to the hotel where Grand Duke Leon Petrovna was staying, eager to finalize the transaction. However, Grand Duke Leon Petrovna was worried. He suspected that the informant might be one of his enemies. If these people weren't dealt with, the tanks couldn't be transported out at all. The Grand Duke then presented Tommy with a sapphire the size of a pigeon's egg, telling him it was a reward for dealing with the informant. He reminded Tommy that once the matter was resolved, they could complete the deal. Tommy didn't think much of it. With the reach of the Razor Gang across the country, he was confident it wouldn't take long to solve the problem. So, Tommy accepted the sapphire and gave it to his beloved wife. But Tommy would soon regret this gesture of affection for the rest of his life. That night, Tommy hosted a lavish charity gala at his mansion, attended by the Razor Gang and their associates. At the event, Grace's stunning beauty, paired with the sapphire she wore, made her the center of attention as soon as she entered the room. But just then, Tatiana found Tommy. Regarding Tatiana's claim that the sapphire was cursed, Tommy, who grew up in gang warfare, didn't believe in these superstitions at all, but he thought Tatiana might be hinting at something else. So Tommy quickly went to find his wife. Grace was a little jealous of her husband talking to a strange woman, and they teased each other like this. But just as quickly as happiness arrived, it slipped away. Out of nowhere, A waiter rushed forward with a gun. Arthur tried to stop the waiter, but the bullets still hit Grace in the left chest. Guests scattered in panic at the sound of the gunshot. Tommy shouted for an ambulance, while John and Arthur fought fiercely with the assailant. On the other side, Tatiana calmly smoked a cigarette, watching the chaos unfold. It was a scene of violence and love, like a famous painting, full of tragic beauty. 3 days later, Grace passed away. Tommy sat before his wife's grave, staring into the flames, a fierce look of vengeance in his eyes. In the previous episode, Tommy's wife Grace was shot at a charity gala hosted by the Shelby family. So who killed Grace? And why? This old man is not simple, despite his age. Vicente went as far as hiring someone to assassinate Razor Gang boss Tommy Shelby's wife in order to avenge his son. Although this act would destroy the empire he spent half a lifetime building, Vicente saw no other choice for the sake of his son. Tommy was furious when he learned that his wife had been killed by a small-time figure. He asked John what had happened. John explained that a few days ago, they discovered a new power encroaching on their docks. So he and his brother Arthur went to negotiate with Vicente. But Vicente's personality was stubborn, and he was extremely tough in the face of their demand for him to back off. So, when John saw that the negotiations were going nowhere, he privately went after Vicente's son, Angel. He slashed his face and also destroyed Angel's bar, intending to send a warning to Vicente. But instead of retreating, Vicente sought revenge, and on the day Grace was shot, Vicente fled with his wife, moving from place to place. According to the information they received, Vicente was heading to New York with his wife Audrey. Upon hearing John's account, Tommy told him to go to New York, bring Vicente back, and then kill his wife. This put John in a difficult position because Vicente's wife had once been their teacher in elementary school, and he asked Tommy if they could spare Audrey.
My wife took a bullet meant for me!
Seeing that Tommy was unwavering, John and Arthur had no choice but to obey. So, John and Arthur, acting on the intel, beat Vicente to New York. When Vicente and his wife saw John and Arthur, they were shocked. They knew it was too late, and Audrey started playing the emotional card. Audrey begged her former students to spare them, asking them to go back and lie to Tommy, saying that Vicente had been killed and his body thrown into the sea. Hearing his former teacher say this, Arthur replied, "The Razor Gang has rules. Tommy's orders must be followed." He then forcibly separated them and took Vicente away. Meanwhile, John stayed behind to deal with Audrey. Looking at the saddened teacher, John couldn't bring himself to kill her. After Arthur had left, John told Audrey to live her life well here. After bringing Vicente back to London, Tommy prepared to use all the tortures he knew on him, but Vicente kept his eyes tightly shut and recited the Bible without stopping. This made Tommy suddenly think of his wife. If she were in heaven, she surely wouldn't want to see him in this state. He asked Vicente if he didn't want to defend himself, but Vicente kept his eyes closed, maintaining the same position. The Bible verses he muttered seemed to have a magical power, striking directly at Tommy's soul. In a brief moment of struggle, Tommy suddenly released Vicente, turned, and stepped back. Vicente opened his eyes, thinking he had been saved, but Tommy came back with a gunshot. Arthur killed Vicente, and Tommy stood frozen in place. John then revealed that he had let Audrey go. John knew that his brother, though brutal, never killed without reason. Tommy seemed to wake up, realizing that he had been blinded by hatred. He ordered John to bury Vicente and then left the scene. It was from that moment on that Tommy's mindset began to change. He realized that leading the family into high society was the true purpose behind his rise to power as the leader of the Razor Gang. This is a group of women from the Shelby family, dressed in elegant clothes and exuding unwavering confidence. Because of the Razor Gang's influence in the area, they are able to walk the streets without fear, even in such turbulent times. On the other side, the men ride their high horses, overseeing the family's business operations. But Esme, the wife of the third brother John, secretly sneaks back inside. She carefully opens the vault door, intending to steal some money, but doesn't realize that John has returned early and catches her in the act. Seeing this, Esme tries to flee, but John pins her against the wall. He warns her, "This is the Razor Gang, not your Lee family." Esme, tearfully, says she's tired of being there, feeling sorry for his wife. John tells her that soon, he'll be able to buy a big house just like his brother, and at that time, she won't have to suffer in this small shack anymore. Then, they share a tender kiss. Meanwhile, Tommy has begun to recover from the pain of losing his wife. He planned to complete the deal with Grand Duke Leon Petrovna, but in the process, he accidentally discovered that Father Hughes was the leak. Tommy follows Father Hughes, intending to deal with him, but he didn't expect Father Hughes to be prepared. Having his men beat Tommy senseless, it turns out that the day before, a drunken Polly had gone to the church to pray and casually mentioned Tommy's plans to kill a clergyman. This mistake caused Tommy a lot of trouble. He ended up bedridden for 3 months, recovering from his injuries. When he finally recovered, Tommy decided he would trust no one anymore. At that time, many were saying that Grand Duke Leon Petrovna didn't have the money to buy the tanks he had claimed. So, Tommy went to Alfie, asking for his help in evaluating the value of the items in the Grand Duke's supposed vault. How much could a fallen Russian duke possibly have? Just the Faberge egg on the table alone was worth £70,000. In the aftermath of World War I, that amount of money could buy a small city. Tommy knew that if he could get his hands on this, he could elevate the family to the heights he dreamed of. So without hesitation, he agreed to the deal with Grand Duke Leon Petrovna. As for how to cooperate, Tommy was planning to take a different approach. Grand Duke Leon Petrovna had bought the tanks to start a war, and no matter what the outcome, their family would end up as scapegoats. So, Tommy decided to go through with the official transaction but secretly ordered for the firing pins to be removed from the tanks. The special nature of these tanks made their firing pins difficult to replicate. Next, Tommy bought a plot of land near Grand Duke Leon Petrovna's villa and brought in the Lee family to dig a tunnel directly to the treasure vault. He was preparing to undermine the Grand Duke's plans from the ground up. Just as everything was proceeding according to plan, Tommy suddenly realized that his son Charles had gone missing. He ordered his men to search the entire villa, but the only reports he received were full of disappointment. Since his wife passed away some time ago, his son had become the only support in Tommy's heart, but now he had actually lost his son. Seeing his brother losing control, Arthur rushed to comfort him, telling Tommy that a servant had seen the child being taken away in a car. "I've already sent men to block the surrounding roads. You just need to return to the shop and wait by the phone. Whoever took the child must have an agenda, so they'll definitely find a way to contact you." Arthur then asked Polly to take Tommy back. As it turned out, things developed just as Arthur had predicted. Not long after Tommy arrived at the shop, the guards informed him that a priest was asking for him. Tommy knew this priest was no ordinary man, so he warned his family to stay inside, then went alone to get into the priest's car. Father Hughes was direct, saying that he was the one who had kidnapped Charles. Charles was safe for now, but if Tommy wanted to keep him alive, he had to hand over all the stolen treasures, especially the Faberge egg, which was non-negotiable. Father Hughes then handed Tommy an envelope and told him that tomorrow, a train carrying government officials would pass through. "You need to blow it up and scatter the contents of this envelope on the wreckage. This will implicate certain Soviet embassy officials. The two countries could end up breaking diplomatic ties. Then, you can give me the treasures, and the job will be done. If either of these two tasks is not completed, the 5 o'clock bell in the town will toll as the death knell for your son." In order to save his son, Tommy had no choice but to nod his head and agree. After returning, Tommy gathered all the key members of the family. Since only a few people knew about the tunnel digging, there was no way Father Hughes, an outsider, could know so much. Someone must have betrayed them. As Tommy listened to his family's protests, he suddenly remembered that he had only told them about digging the tunnel, but never mentioned the Faberge egg. The only people who knew about it were himself and Alfie. The next day, Tommy met with Alfie and asked for a list of everyone in London who was interested in the Faberge egg. He then compared it with the list of buyers he had already found. Sure enough, Tommy noticed that one name was missing, since Alfie was still his collaborator. The issue of Alfie's betrayal would have to wait until he found his son. Tommy then ordered the police to arrest the person on the list. Tommy, the king of London's underground world, had his son kidnapped, so he sent his men to capture anyone who could be connected to the abduction. After executing the buyer, Tommy split his forces into 3. He sent Michael to kill Father Hughes, while John and Arthur were to blow up the train. Tommy himself would go through the tunnel to steal all the treasures from the vault. If Michael failed to kill Father Hughes, Tommy could still complete Father Hughes' 2 demands in exchange for Charles. Michael did not disappoint Tommy. He successfully killed Father Hughes and rescued Charles. But just as he was about to tell Arthur to stop the operation, it was too late. The train had already been blown to pieces. Meanwhile, Tommy was still unaware of everything that had happened outside. He kept swinging his pickaxe and finally managed to blast open the last wall of the treasure vault. As he looked at the valuable treasures inside, Tommy packed everything into bags, especially the Faberge egg. After looting everything of value, Tommy drove to a nearby phone booth. He wanted to ask the others how things were going on their end. As soon as the phone was picked up, Charles's voice came through. At that moment, Tommy couldn't hold back any longer. All his anxieties exploded. After cleaning himself up, Tommy rushed home and tightly embraced his son, who was playing. This was the only connection he had left to his late wife. Next, Tommy went to Tatiana and sold her all the stolen jewelry. Then, Tommy gathered all the family members together to distribute the money. Everyone was shocked by this action. They wondered why the money, which should have gone into the family vault, was being handed out on the spot. Tommy replied, "You all did what you did, so you deserve what you get." Polly asked, "What does that mean?"
And I know you all want me to say that I'll change, that this business will change, but I've learned something in the last few days. Those bastards are worse than us. Politicians, judges, lords and ladies, they're worse than us, and they will never admit us to their palaces, no matter how legitimate we become, because of who we are.
After hearing Tommy's words, the family members reluctantly accepted. Just when everyone thought the matter was settled, Tommy added, "Yesterday, the sheriff called to say that arrest warrants have been issued for all of you." Faced with their family's questioning, Tommy assured them that he would get them out of trouble, but by now, no one believed his words. Thus, a family that had been at the top just a day before now had half its members reduced to prisoners. This was a group of Razor Gang members about to be executed by hanging. As they stared at the thick ropes, fear crept onto their faces. No matter how glorious they had been in the past, when death's scythe was at their throats, all they could do was pray. Just as the officers were about to carry out the execution, suddenly, a police officer ran over holding a pardon, and just like that, they were saved. It turned out that on the day of execution, Tommy had presented evidence to the judge proving that Churchill had colluded with the enemy, with the king himself involved. To prevent this matter from being exposed, the members of the Razor Gang were granted a pardon, but the family was now completely shattered. Most members stepped away from the core of the Razor Gang and went on to live normal lives. Only Tommy and Michael remained to keep the family business running. On Christmas Day, Tommy received an envelope with a black handprint on it. This was sent by Luca, the mafia boss who had just returned from the United States. Luca's purpose for coming to England was clear: revenge. 3 years ago, Tommy had killed his father, and now he intended to kill Tommy and his entire family. Having been in the game for many years, Tommy knew exactly how the mafia operated. He urgently contacted the rest of the family, but John's phone went unanswered. With no other option, he sent Michael to check on the situation. As they continued to argue over Tommy, a group of mobsters armed with machine guns suddenly emerged from the haystack, opening fire on John and Michael. Poor John was shot multiple times and died on the spot, while Michael, lucky enough to avoid fatal wounds, managed to survive. Looking at John's body lying on the bed, the two brothers were filled with rage, but what they felt more deeply was sorrow. Tommy knew deep down that the mafia's revenge wouldn't end until every one of them was dead. He had to come up with a plan to deal with it, and fast. He gathered everyone in the family and forbade them from acting alone. Then, he told them he had made arrangements with a gypsy gang leader to cooperate with him. His subordinates were unhappy when they heard this. They argued that those people were ruthless criminals, even stealing from their own business. They refused to work with such people, but Tommy explained, "It's precisely because these people are ruthless that I'm working with them. Assholes will understand assholes better." After explaining everything to everyone, the family went to John's funeral. Before his death, John had fought alongside Arthur and Tommy in World War I. During one of the battles, they had run out of ammunition and were on the brink of collapse. It was then that their commander taught them a song, the Ballad of the Long, Cold Winter's Day Star. This song gave them the strength to hold on and endure. John had once said, "If I die, don't bury me." Tommy supported John's wishes and decided to cremate him instead. Arthur stepped forward and lit the funeral pyre, and thin wisps of smoke rose into the air, carrying away everything that John had experienced in his past. Not far from the ceremony, two Italians prepared to make their move. They loaded their guns, slowly aimed at their target, and eventually zeroed in on Tommy's position. Just as they were about to pull the trigger, a hand suddenly covered one of their mouths from behind, and a knife plunged into his heart. Meanwhile, the man's men took out the other assassin. The sound of gunfire startled the mourners, who quickly drew their weapons and prepared to retaliate. Tommy, however, told them not to panic. "This is part of the plan," he said. But Polly was extremely angry. She snapped, "You've put all our lives at risk as bait." Tommy explained, "These two men are from the local Italian gang, sent to assassinate me. The time and place were all revealed by me. because I wanted to test Abe Rama Gold, but Polly wasn't satisfied with this explanation. Although Abe Rama was dressed impeccably, he was actually a ruthless bastard. When he saw his partner's factory, he immediately expressed interest in buying it. This was Charlie's family business, and there was no way he was going to sell it. Seeing that his advances were being rejected, Abe Rama approached Tommy again and said, "I've set my sights on your factory. Tell me, how much do you want for it?" What Abe Rama didn't know was that this time, he was up against someone tough. Tommy called Charlie over and said, "We're going to flip a coin to decide everything. If it's heads, your factory goes to him, but if it's tails..."
I f*** your daughter, Mr. Gold.
After setting the stakes, Tommy tossed the coin to Abe Rama. Abe Rama hesitated for a moment. He kept flipping the coin in his hands, then smiled slightly, thinking Tommy was just joking, but Tommy shook his head and said, "This is very serious. The notary is right here with you. If you toss that coin, we'll stick to our word."
No wages today. But with this penny, I will buy a flower to put on your grave.
After establishing his authority with Abe Rama, Tommy got down to business. Abe Rama said to Tommy, "I can help you deal with the mafia from New York, but in return, you need to accept my son Bonnie and help him realize his ambitions." In the last episode, Tommy, in response to the mafia's threats, reached a temporary agreement with Abe Rama. Abe Rama agreed to fight for the Razor Gang under the condition that they accept his son, Bonnie Gold. To help Abe Rama's son achieve his ambitions, Tommy organized an amateur match for Bonnie. However, Bonnie spent the entire match on the defensive, which didn't sit well with former underground boxing champion Arthur. Arthur was amazed to see a large man knocked out by Bonnie with a single punch, exclaiming that the kid was a natural-born talent. Tommy also praised Bonnie's performance and promised to find him the best boxing coach in all of London. At that moment, union leader Jessie approached Tommy, complaining that male workers at the Shelby factory earned 10 shillings more than female workers. Despite doing the same job, she demanded equal pay. When Tommy heard what it was about, he said, "From now on, male workers will get 5 shillings less, and female workers will get 5 shillings more. That way, they'll have equal pay for equal work." Jessie, stunned by Tommy's response, warned that if he went through with it, she would lead a strike. Unfazed by this threat, Tommy told Jessie that she could go ahead and blow the whistle whenever she liked. As a result, the Shelby factory experienced its first ever strike under Jessie's leadership. Just as Tommy was still grappling with the murder of his brother, Luca sought him out. This can be described as enemies meeting and getting extra angry. Tommy killed Luca's father to avenge his wife. Luca came all the way from New York to England to avenge his father, and then he killed Tommy's brother. Knowing that Luca must have something up his sleeve to come to him so boldly, Tommy decided to hear him out. As Luca saw Tommy with a cigarette in his mouth, he took a toothpick from his jacket pocket, put it in his mouth, and said, "Someone told me Tommy Shelby is a man who dresses well, but I have an uncle who's a tailor, and every stitch he makes is soaked in blood. So, you're definitely not dressed as well as I am." Hearing this guy talking about clothes, Tommy took out his pistol and was ready to send him to the other world. Luca, however, calmly pulled a handful of bullets from his pocket, saying, "I made it to your office, didn't I? How could I not know where your gun is?" Tommy looked down and saw that his gun's magazine was indeed empty. Luca placed the bullets on the table and continued, "Arthur Shelby, Polly, Michael, John Shelby. Since John has already been killed." Luca knocked over the bullet representing him on the table. "The last one is for Tommy Shelby." Luca stood up and said, "I could have killed you when I walked in, but I didn't. I want you to watch as your family members die, one by one, right in front of you." In order to counter Luca's mafia retaliation, Tommy decided to strike first. For the safety of her son Michael, Polly pretended to betray the family. However, Luca, with his meticulous mind, had risen through the ranks of the New York Mafia to become a small-time boss, and he was no fool. When Polly offered her allegiance, Luca only pretended to accept her. In private, he secretly ordered his men to find a woman. This woman was very special because, a few years ago, during a boxing match, Arthur, the second-in-command of the Razor Gang, accidentally killed her son. In an effort to make amends, the Razor Gang had placed Mrs. Ross under their protection. Now, Luca intended to use Mrs. Ross's hidden vendetta to lure Arthur out and kill him. Upon hearing Mrs. Ross's story, Tommy immediately realized that this was a trap set by Luca. He first expressed his agreement, then gathered his men and instructed them to lay an ambush around Mrs. Ross's house the next day, preparing for a counterattack. At noon the next day, Arthur arrived at Mrs. Ross's house as promised. Meanwhile, Tommy was hiding at a concealed window, observing the surroundings. At that moment, a black car slowly drove up, and Tommy quickly signaled his men. Seeing the signal, they drew their weapons, ready for battle. However, the car stopped, and the driver leisurely leaned against the vehicle, smoking a cigarette. Tommy, sensing something was off, made a pause gesture to his man. Inside the house, Arthur asked Mrs. Ross why she had invited him here alone. With red eyes, Mrs. Ross replied, "Of course, it's for revenge." Just as she finished speaking, Mrs. Ross's daughter ran outside, waving a handkerchief in front of the car. Tommy thought this was the enemy's signal to attack, but the next moment, the driver unexpectedly reversed the car. He quickly ordered his men to open fire, but it was too late. Realizing he had walked into a trap, Tommy understood that Luca's real target wasn't Arthur, but Michael at the hospital. He quickly gathered his men and ordered his brother to notify Arthur. When Arthur learned that the target was Michael, he overturned a table in rage and drew his gun, ready to kill Mrs. Ross. When Arthur heard Mrs. Ross mention the child, he calmed down. He told her, "If I come back here in an hour and find you still here, I'll pour gasoline all over you." At the hospital, Luca swiftly killed the guards and found Michael. Luca had just left when Tommy arrived. He immediately asked Michael what had happened. Michael said that their bullets misfired and they were afraid that you would come, so they quickly fled. But Tommy knew Luca all too well, and he was sure Michael was hiding something. However, there was no time to dwell on it. He urgently called Abe Rama, asking him to find a way to kill Luca on his way back. Luca was a dangerously skilled man, and to avenge his father, he had traveled all the way from New York to the Razor Gang's territory. After killing John, he had boldly confronted Tommy Shelby, the head of the gang. Faced with Luca's threat, Tommy remained unfazed. When Luca killed his brother John, the Shelby family had already put their personal lives on the line. The only priority now was to avenge John. So after Luca had left, Tommy quickly called his partner Abe Rama. Tommy knew that Luca's route would pass through the Gypsy district, so he thought it best for Abe Rama to handle the job. At this moment, Luca had yet to realize that death was closing in on him. When Luca heard it would take 20 minutes to clear the roadblocks, he became irritated. He called his men out of the car to help, but the police stopped them. This completely normal action raised Luca's suspicions. He thought it might be a trap, so he ordered his men to return to the car. But no matter how loudly Luca shouted, the driver remained unresponsive. Seeing the driver's throat cut, Luca realized something was wrong, but it was too late. Aberama's men launched their attack. Luca and his crew tried to fight back, but the enemies were hidden in the trees, making the visibility poor. As his men were taken down one by one, Luca pushed the driver aside and sped off in the car. Fleeing in panic, enraged by this failure, Luca immediately called Polly. He threatened her with Michael's life, demanding that she reveal the exact time Tommy would be out. Although Polly was Tommy's aunt, in the end, for the sake of her son's safety, she chose to cooperate. These were dangerous men, wearing black bowler hats, chewing toothpicks, and armed with submachine guns. They had crossed the ocean to kill Tommy Shelby, the head of the Razor Gang. Seeing a car ahead stop, Luca and his men jumped out of the car. On the other side, Tommy had already made his way to the upper floor. He pulled aside the burlap covering the machine gun and opened fire on them from above. Luca and his men, seeing the ambush, took cover behind the car. They waited until Tommy ran out of ammunition before emerging to counterattack. Under heavy fire, Tommy had no choice but to abandon the machine gun and retreat into a nearby building. On the other side, Luca and his men chased into the residential building and found the layout inside to be very complex. They could only stay on high alert and move forward slowly. Suddenly, a boy opened a door, startling them. Luca saw the boy say Tommy's whereabouts and let him go. By this time, Tommy had already made his way to a safe exit. He first eliminated the guards below, then hid behind a wooden barrel. Seeing himself toyed with by the leader of this small gang, Luca, the mafia man from New York, was furious. Luca ordered his last henchman to keep watch at the rear and called out to Tommy for a one-on-one fight. And Tommy, who had conquered the underground forces of London, was of course braver than most. Without hesitation, he stepped out from behind the cover, just as the two men were preparing to square off, ready to settle the score with a single shot. The city's police arrived. Luca knew that these police officers were aligned with Tommy, so he had no choice but to retreat. Seeing his enemy escape right in front of him, Tommy was enraged. He demanded to know why the police had intervened. The police chief calmly responded, It's our responsibility to protect the safety of the residents. Tommy scoffs at this explanation. He threw a stack of banknotes and turned around to leave. Back at home, Tommy gazed at the photo of his deceased wife, deeply saddened. Although he had avenged Grace's death, Luca had killed his brother. Although Tommy had won the battle that day, the mastermind, Luca, had escaped unscathed. Facing this looming threat, Tommy knew he had to find a way to draw Luca out. To lure out the mafia man who had killed his brother, Tommy approached Alfie. "I'm planning to host a boxing match under the name of Razor Gang, and I need your nephew Goliath to fight." Alfie, hearing there was money to be made, immediately agreed. Just as he was about to ask who the opponent was, Abe Rama entered with his son, Bonnie. Seeing the gypsies, Alfie was not pleased. He pointed to his nephew and said, "Goliath is the champion of the Southern Division. His iron fists have the power to destroy everything beautiful." Goliath's mother ran off with another man when he was just 3. Scared of him, "If you're not afraid your son might get killed, then let him fight in the match." Hearing Alfie's words, Abe Rama was a bit shaken. He knew that although Alfie was exaggerating, Goliath really had won the title of champion, while his own son hadn't fought a single professional match. Abe Rama was uncertain. Seeing Bonnie unafraid, Tommy gave a look of approval. 2 days later, the biggest boxing match in Birmingham kicked off. Thanks to the spectacle of a champion facing off against an amateur, tickets were selling fast. In the backstage area, Tommy approached Bonnie and told him, "If you win, I'll give you 20% of the profits from the match." This boosted Bonnie's confidence. On the other side, because it was a Shelby family event, the women of the family were dressed to the nines, becoming a striking sight as they entered. Tommy, however, remained expressionless. He wasn't hosting the match for profit. His goal was to draw out Luca and get revenge for his brother John. As the two fighters entered the ring, the crowd's cheers reached a fever pitch. But sitting in the audience, Arthur noticed a man across from him who was repeatedly provoking him. Tommy knew his brother was a ticking time bomb, so he hoped the fight in the ring would draw his attention back. However, the man across from Arthur made a taunting gesture, and Arthur couldn't hold back anymore. He stood up, ready to confront him backstage. Faced with his brother's impulsive nature, Tommy was helpless, but he had to stay, as he needed to be on site to control the situation. Just then, Tommy noticed someone else from the other side had left. He had a feeling that things were more complicated than they seemed. Fearing that Arthur might be in danger, Tommy quickly followed. Meanwhile, Arthur was backstage, searching for the man who had been provoking him. Just as he stepped into a warehouse, the man suddenly appeared from behind and strangled him with a wire. Facing this sudden situation, Arthur tried to shoot back, but his wrist was held down. The sound of the gunshot alerted Tommy, who immediately drew his own weapon and rushed toward the noise. But by this time, Arthur had already been strangled to the ground, and the murderer picked up the pistol and was about to shoot him in the head. In this critical moment, Tommy arrived and shot the assailant dead. Looking at his brother covered in blood, Tommy hugged him and kept calling his name. Meanwhile, back in the ring, Bonnie had fulfilled Tommy's request and defeated Goliath. But Tommy had no time to celebrate Bonnie's victory. His brother was dead. He ordered his family members to lock down the entire boxing hall, for when an avalanche strikes, no snowflake is innocent. Seeing his brother lying on the ground, motionless, Tommy was heartbroken. He called Aunt Polly to deal with Arthur's body, while he walked down a hallway and started punching and kicking a man. This man was carrying a wire that was similar to the one used to strangle Arthur. After having Finn gouge the man's eyes out, Tommy grabbed a gun and rushed up to the ring, firing several shots into the air. Seeing Tommy on the brink of madness, Charlie quickly rushed to him, holding him tightly and saying, "If you keep this up, everything we've done to maintain our image will be destroyed." Hearing this, Tommy regained his sanity. 3 days later, Arthur's funeral was held as scheduled. Tommy didn't attend the funeral because this family was something that the three brothers had worked so hard to build together. Now, in less than a month, both Arthur and John had left him. Tommy found it hard to accept, especially with an unknown enemy still lurking in the shadows. To preserve the family bloodline, Tommy sent Polly's son, Michael, to Brooklyn to manage the business there. Tommy himself went to meet Luca, intending to settle things with him once and for all. When Luca saw that only a few of the once powerful Razor Gang remained, he found it somewhat amusing. Luca then called for his men to bring forward a stack of contracts and handed them to Tommy. These contracts listed all of the Shelby family's holdings. He told Tommy, "If you transfer everything to me, I'll let you go." Tommy replied, "Didn't you monopolize the whiskey trade in New York? Well, I've contacted two powerful forces from Chicago and Brooklyn. They're very interested in your assets. And those trusted men you brought from New York? They only care about money. I've already bought them all off." When Luca heard that his assets were in jeopardy, and his men were turning on him, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at Tommy. Tommy knocked the gun out of Luca's hand with a wooden stick, then pinned Luca to the table and gave him a brutal beating. Just then, a familiar face walked in. Finn was startled when he saw who had arrived. It turned out that everything had been part of Tommy's plan. Arthur hadn't died at all, he had only been slightly injured. To completely defeat Luca, Tommy had pretended that his brother was dead, and his outburst at the ring had made everyone believe it. The goal was to deceive Luca and draw him out. Sure enough, 3 days after the news broke, Luca took the bait. He demanded that Tommy hand over all of Razor Gang's assets. If Tommy refused, there would be bloodshed. Realizing he had been tricked, Luca was furious, but his skills were no match for Tommy's. In the end, Arthur appeared. Without wasting any time, he shot Luca in the head, eliminating the threat and avenging his brother John. The news of Razor Gang defeating the New York Mafia spread like wildfire through Birmingham. Tommy knew that the time had come. With his newfound reputation, he was now able to infiltrate the power center and fully legitimize the family. But before that, he had to make a painful decision to eliminate one of his old allies. After the Razor Gang defeated the New York Mafia, their prestige reached new heights. Tommy knew the time had come. He had to seize this opportunity to lead his family into a new realm. But before taking that step, he had to make a painful decision. This was a battle-hardened warhorse, one that had witnessed the rise of a once weak family. Yet now, its owner, Tommy Shelby, had no choice but to sacrifice it in order to run for a seat in Parliament. After bidding a heart-wrenching farewell to his old companion, Tommy successfully entered the race for the Birmingham constituency as a member of Parliament. In the end, Tommy emerged victorious, winning 10 times the votes of the runner-up. He became the undisputed ruler of both the underworld and the legitimate world in the area. Thanks to Tommy, his family members saw their wealth multiply, and they began living the lives of the elite. But this blissful period didn't last long before a new crisis emerged. Due to the socio-economic climate of the time, the American financial market entered a downturn. Tommy, leveraging his connections, received advance notice of this. He made an urgent call to Michael, who was in New York, instructing him to sell off all their stocks immediately. However, Michael had already lost himself in the decadence of New York's high society and completely neglected the matter. 2 days later, Wall Street crashed. The Shelby family suffered massive financial losses. Frustrated by the inaction of his family members, Tommy grew weary. Whenever such setbacks occurred, he would retreat alone into the woods, becoming a man who sought solace from the spirit of his late wife. After waiting until dawn, he would once again put on the shell of the Razor Gang leader and wander among the various forces. Today marked Tommy's first session as Birmingham's Member of Parliament. He decided to speak up on behalf of the working class. Hearing that the Razor Gang was coming, the bar owner hurriedly cleared out a private room for them. But this time, Tommy and his men weren't there to fight for territory or seek revenge. Instead, their purpose was to gather information on workers' grievances about current social welfare issues. Tommy intended to compile this information and use it to make a speech at the National Labor Party conference that afternoon. After collecting some valuable information, Tommy provided everyone with a free beer and assured them that if they faced any unfair treatment at work, he would personally take care of it. Hearing that someone was willing to speak on their behalf, the workers expressed their heartfelt gratitude to Tommy. In the afternoon, Tommy, wearing his flat cap and smoking a cigarette, strode into the Parliament chamber. It was truly remarkable to see a former gang leader rise to such a position. During the session, the Labour Party chairman raised the topic of how to revitalize the economy. Tommy did not let the workers down. He was the first to speak, arguing that workers should not be scapegoats in the aftermath of the financial storm. He advocated for stricter limitations on capitalist magnates, ensuring money didn't continue flowing into the fragile stock market. Instead, he emphasized the need to invest in real industries and improve conditions for the working class. Tommy's speech, infused with a strong socialist ethos, resonated with the other members of Parliament. Applause erupted as they expressed their agreement. After the meeting, a man approached Tommy, introducing himself as Mosley, the founder of the British Union of Fascists. He expressed a strong interest in Tommy. Tommy glanced at him, said nothing, and walked away. But as soon as Tommy returned home, he discovered a scarecrow standing in the middle of his rice field, with a letter addressed to him pinned to it. The letter contained only a single sentence: "Asterisk, look down at the seeds buried in your soil." Glancing down, Tommy was horrified to find a landmine buried in the ground. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead as the ticking of a clock emanated from the scarecrow. Tommy knew the area was extremely dangerous and wanted to leave immediately. but he could only move cautiously. Just then, his son came running toward him. Tommy dropped his machine gun and sprinted toward Charles. Charles was his only link to his late wife. Losing his own life didn't matter, but he would never allow his son to come to harm. After getting Charles to a safe place, Tommy pondered for a moment and decided to completely eliminate the threat. After detonating all the explosives, Tommy received a phone call from New York in his office. The caller introduced herself as Captain Swing of the Irish Republican Army. She informed Tommy that Michael was planning to secretly divide up the Razor Gang's horse racing business. Then she offered, "If you're willing, I can help you take him out." Although Tommy was furious at Michael for ignoring his warning and causing massive financial losses for the family, he couldn't forget that Michael was still his aunt's son. He instructed Captain Swing to hold off and let Michael return home. Whether Michael was truly a traitor was something Tommy would determine himself. Michael agreed to the request and remarked, "Your socialist ideals are spot on, Tommy." Before hanging up. 2 days later, Michael arrived in Birmingham from New York with a beautiful girlfriend in tow. But instead of welcoming him back, the family members placed him under temporary confinement in a hotel. Michael loudly protested his innocence, but Tommy's orders were absolute. No one dared disobey. Abe Rama, a notorious local gang leader, made his living through theft and robbery. Yet even a man as ruthless as Abe Rama lowered himself to cooperate with Tommy Shelby, the leader of the Razor Gang, all for the sake of his son Bonnie's boxing career. Tommy kept his promise. After watching Bonnie perform in an amateur match and being thoroughly impressed, Tommy used his influence to arrange a championship bout for the young boxer. Despite being a newcomer, Bonnie showed no fear when facing the veteran champion Goliath. With the entire crowd rooting for Goliath, Bonnie relied on his relentless determination to make a stunning comeback, becoming the youngest boxing champion in the region. But then this young man with a bright future met with an accident while camping in the wild with his father. This group of singing men called themselves the Billy Boys, and they were here specifically to punish Abe Rama. Abe Rama's collaboration with Tommy had threatened their interests, and the Billy Boys decided to make an example of Abe Rama and his son to send a message to Tommy. After brutally beating the father and son, their leader Jimmy ordered Bonnie to be tied to a cross. Then, in front of Abe Rama's eyes, they murdered Bonnie. By nightfall, a bloodied Abe Rama found Tommy and informed him of his son's death. To avenge Abe Rama's son, Tommy and his Aunt Polly went to the church. Because the person in charge here was Jimmy, the leader of the Billy Boys, Tommy had two objectives in going there. The first was to make it clear to his enemies that he had arrived. The second was because someone had reported that children often died mysteriously at the orphanage run by the church. So his second purpose was to take the orphanage away from the church. But the nuns here were very defiant, flatly denying that any children had died and mocking Tommy, saying, "How could a former gang leader ever truly care about the people?" The nuns' words enraged Tommy. Clearly, he would have to resort to his old methods of persuasion. Under Tommy's threats, the church ultimately agreed to withdraw its funding from the orphanage. On the other side, Abe Rama led a group of Tommy's men disguised as road workers to deliberately lure the Billy Boys into a robbery. The Billy Boys' leader was thrilled at the sight of what he saw as helpless lambs awaiting slaughter. He ordered them to hand over their tools, leave the car and the tar behind, and then get lost. Abe Rama, however, calmly replied, "The car keys are in my pocket. Come and get them yourself." Looking at the Billy Boys' leader lying on the ground, Abe Rama picked up a small bucket of boiling tar and poured it over his face, satisfying his thirst for revenge. Unfortunately, since Tommy had forbidden them from killing anyone, the man survived. He went back to Jimmy and reported Abe Rama's retaliation. When Tommy heard the news, he immediately sent Arthur to warn Abe Rama to leave his current hideout. Just as Tommy predicted, shortly after Abe Rama left, Jimmy and a large group of his men arrived only to be met with a special gift left behind by Arthur. With several of his men blown to pieces, Jimmy confronted Tommy, demanding an explanation. Tommy responded, "You planted a landmine on my family's ranch, nearly killing me and my son. As a return gesture, my brother left you a grenade. I'd say that's fair." Then Tommy handed Jimmy an envelope and said, "The Razor Gang controls numerous docks in Birmingham. If we make peace, we can all make money together. But if you disagree, After making it clear what violating the ceasefire agreement would cost, Tommy walked away without looking back, confident of what Jimmy's decision would be. Not long after Tommy returned, a fur-clad triad merchant arrived to meet him. The man introduced himself as Brilliant, an illegal trader operating between Britain and Europe. This time, he had come to propose a business deal. To demonstrate his sincerity, Brilliant presented Tommy's younger brother Finn with a gift. A smiling woman in a cheongsam walked up to Finn. Just as Finn began to imagine spending a pleasant evening with her, the situation took a sharp turn. The woman suddenly pulled a gun and pressed it against his chin. Meanwhile, in Tommy's office, his brother Arthur received a distress call from Finn. Brilliant explained to Tommy, before I came here, I sent a woman with a gun to your brother's office. I've been told that if you want to work with Tommy Shelby, you have to kick down his door first. After achieving the desired effect, Brilliant poured some yellow substance onto the table. He told Tommy, this is the purest contraband in all of Europe. I have 7 tons of it, valued at £1, 2 million. I came here to find you because I hope to temporarily store this batch of goods at your dock. In a week, my people will retrieve it. As payment, I'll give you £250,000 in storage fees. Considering the seriousness of the situation, Tommy didn't agree on the spot and only accepted the sample provided by Brilliant. He needed to discuss it with Arthur and Polly. When Aunt Polly heard that her nephew was planning to deal in contraband, she immediately opposed it. Tommy explained, your son Michael lost £500,000 in New York by not listening to me. The payment for this deal would cover half that loss. If we take this on, I'll put Michael in charge of it. Hearing that Tommy was willing to give Michael another chance, Polly relented. Arthur, however, had a different opinion. He reminded Tommy, have you forgotten what Dad always used to say? Faced with his brother's protest, Tommy replied, all you need to do is arrange for 4 ships carrying scented smoked meat to dock at the harbor. Once they take the goods away within a week, the matter will be over. As for the police, I'll handle them. Without waiting for Arthur's agreement, Tommy turned and returned to his office. He had another important matter to discuss with Abe Rama. To avenge his son, Abe Rama approached Tommy and revealed his plan. He intended to lure Jimmy into an alley with the help of a woman. The noise of nearby machinery would perfectly muffle the sound of gunfire. He then asked, can you lend me a boat to transport the body afterward? But Tommy told Abe Rama, I've recently taken on a major deal, and I need Jimmy's men to provide security. Once the partnership is over in a week, you can handle Jimmy however you like. He replied. Tommy then changed the subject, adding, I know you fancy my Aunt Polly. If you want to marry her, you need to propose. Abe Rama responded eagerly, that's easy. According to our gypsy customs, I'll send over a few piebald horses as part of the proposal. Hearing this unimaginative plan, Tommy shook his head and handed him an invitation card. I'm hosting a dinner party at my house. There'll be a live band, a dance floor, and society's elite in attendance. You can seize the moment to propose to Polly in a proper, respectable way. Touched by Tommy's meticulous planning, Abe Rama beamed with happiness. That afternoon, Tommy resumed his role as the Labour Party MP who championed the working class. However, his speeches, steeped in socialist ideals, made some attendees visibly uncomfortable. After the parliamentary session, the leader of the British fascists, Mosley, approached Tommy and said, I heard you've invited a few ballet dancers to your house. Are you planning to host a party? Tommy understood the insinuation and fired back. I've had your wife, your sister-in-law, and your wife's stepmother investigated. Turns out, they're all your mistresses. You enjoy meeting them in your office and at a certain resort. Tommy added coldly, if you ever send anyone to investigate me again, these details will spread like wildfire through the House of Commons. Mosley was taken aback by Tommy's deep knowledge of his personal affairs, but he didn't back down. Instead, he produced an invitation card and said, I'll be there that night as promised. Seeing Mosley holding an invitation from who knows where, Tommy felt a surge of anger. As Mosley opened the door to leave, Tommy instinctively reached for the drawer of his desk, but at that moment, the voice of his late wife Grace echoed in his ears. Tommy understood exactly what his late wife's words meant. Grace had been gunned down because of the sapphire he had gifted her. Over the years, he had blamed himself endlessly, thinking that if he hadn't given her the gemstone, she might still be alive. But he had never considered that it was the countless enemies he had made that ultimately led to her death. In the end, Tommy abandoned the idea of killing Mosley. That same night, he met with Captain Swing of the Irish Socialist Movement to share the latest intelligence on the fascists. Michael, due to his indulgence in a life of debauchery, had caused the family to lose £500,000. In 1930, such a sum was astronomical, plunging the Shelby family into a financial crisis. Out of respect for his aunt, Tommy decided to offer Michael a chance to redeem his reputation. However, when Michael learned that this opportunity involved contraband, he refused outright. He said to his mother, I won't engage in such a morally bankrupt business, and I need to consult my wife first. Polly didn't take kindly to his defiance. Polly then grabbed a handful of coal from the fireplace and placed it in Michael's hand. She told him, "If you're covered in this black coal dust, see if your wife will still let you touch her." Michael couldn't find a rebuttal to his mother's words. Meanwhile, at Tommy's estate, a grand party was in full swing. A special event he had organized to provide Abe Rama with the perfect setting to propose to Polly. Two kids were playing soccer on the street, and a man sitting in his car watched them with a doting smile on his face. But in the next second, the soccer ball slammed into his car door. The man wasn't angry at all. However, staring at the burning wreckage of the car, Tommy rushed to pick up the child who had been thrown to the ground by the blast. Guilt weighed heavily on his heart. If it hadn't been for him, this tragedy might never have happened. And all of this began with a banquet Tommy hosted at his home the day before. Tommy had specially arranged this banquet to help Abe Rama propose. It should have been a joyous occasion, but everything changed when a man took the stage. The man on the stage was named Mosley, the founder of the British Union of Fascists. Because he had made a private deal with Tommy, the latter did nothing to stop Mosley when he took the stage to deliver his speech. As Mosley looked out at the elites seated below, he presented an idea that would lead to immeasurable suffering. Mosley's fiery and impassioned speech successfully won over the influential figures at the banquet. After the guests left, Mosley sought Tommy out privately, asking for his help with a favor, since new ideas would inevitably provoke unrest. Mosley needed Tommy to use the influence of the Razor Gang to suppress future protesters. In return, Mosley promised a reward of $3 million once the revolution succeeded. The offer was too lucrative for Tommy to refuse. However, he secretly wrote down everything Mosley had said and sent it in a letter to Colonel Ben Younger, who supported socialism. But there was already a bomb planted in Colonel Ben Younger's car. The moment he started the car, flames erupted into the sky, staring at the injured child. Tommy was furious. The explosion happened right outside his office building, a clear and threatening message. If he disobeyed, this would be the consequence. But Tommy didn't become the king of Birmingham's underworld by tolerating threats. His response to anyone who dared challenge him was always the same: take them out first. The man locked inside the cell was named Barney, a renowned British sniper. However, after killing too many during the war, his mind was shattered, and he ended up confined in a mental asylum. Tommy sought out Barney to take down Mosley.
Barney, you were the best sniper in our company, never missed. I can use that, man. Get you the latest PSA telescopic sights. Who am I shooting? You get Barney, get that fucking thing off.
2 days later, Mosley hosted a grand fascist rally, and Tommy, as his partner, was invited to attend. Tommy positioned Barney on the second floor, directly across from the podium, while he stood to Mosley's left on stage. The plan was simple. Once Mosley's speech reached its peak, Tommy's men outside would storm the building's guards, creating chaos. At that moment, Barney would take the shot. With Mosley dead, Tommy would seize the microphone as his partner, harness the power of the fascists, and redirect them. But reality is always contrary to one's wishes. Just as Barney was about to pull the trigger, he was shot dead by a masked figure. From the stage, Tommy kept his eyes fixed on the second floor window, but even as Mosley's speech concluded, Barney made no move. Tommy knew something had gone terribly wrong. Furious, he stormed backstage and demanded to know which of his family had leaked the plan. With a furious roar, Tommy pulled the trigger, but as he collapsed to the ground, he realized the gun was empty. Lizzie emerged from the mist and scolded him. "You're nothing but a coward. You didn't even check the gun." She then opened her left hand, and 6 bullets dropped onto the firearm. After Lizzie walked away, Tommy pulled himself up from the mud, his thoughts turning to his late mother. After the failed assassination attempt on Mosley, Tommy was consumed by a desire to die. However, for the continuation of the Shelby family, Arthur secretly removed the bullets from Tommy's gun, preventing the suicide. As Tommy returned to his office, full of despair, the phone on his desk suddenly rang. On the other end was Captain Swing of the Irish Republican Army. She informed Tommy that it was the IRA who had stopped the assassination attempt on Mosley. The reason? They needed Mosley alive to continue creating chaos. Mosley couldn't die yet. She also had a gift for Tommy: 3 corpses. As Tommy untied the ropes on the body bags, the faces of the dead were revealed. It was Barney, Abe Rama, and Aunt Polly. Faced with such a devastating sight, Tommy could only bury his face in his hands and weep. 3 days later, the Shelby family held a funeral for Polly. The person who lit the funeral pyre was none other than Polly's son, Michael. As he watched the carriage carrying his mother's body consumed by flames, Michael swore to himself that no matter the cost, one day, he would kill Tommy Shelby. In Michael's mind, it was Tommy's insistence on assassinating Mosley that had led to his mother's death. Time passed, and soon it was 1933. For years had gone by since Polly's funeral. Tommy traveled to Miquelon Island in Newfoundland, France, for the sake of the family business. This time, he was there to negotiate a deal with Michael. This was the day Michael had long been waiting for. Tommy, fully aware of the depth of Michael's hatred, went to the police chief first. He informed him that there might be a shootout soon, and if anything happened to him, the chief should contact his brother Arthur. With that settled, Tommy entered a bar and ordered a glass of plain water. This move annoyed the bartender, who warned Tommy that if he wanted water, he'd better step outside and drink it there. Tommy ignored him. However, a thug nearby couldn't hold back and grabbed Tommy's glass, filling it with whiskey. Listening to the thug's threats,
Drink it. Drink. You're not leaving this bar.
Tommy stubbed out his cigarette and told him, "If you want me to drink that, you'd better sit down and wait until I finish reading my newspaper." Feeling disrespected, the thug smirked, picked up a bottle of liquor, and smashed it on the bar counter. When the thug refused to listen to reason, Tommy pulled out a gun and shot a pigeon mid-flight. He calmly declared, "I may have quit drinking, but I never quit my temper." Tommy then instructed a waitress who had come running after hearing the gunshot to prepare a private room. He was expecting a guest. With Michael's arrival, the meeting officially began. Tommy first proposed his intention to enter the contraband business. With prohibition repealed, smuggling liquor was no longer profitable. Instead, he planned to source goods through Michael's wife Gina's uncle, Nelson, who ran a lucrative network. From there, the goods could be routed through Miquelon Island to America. Tommy assured them there would be no issues, as the garrison commander on Miquelon Island was a former comrade of his. Faced with a deal that seemed too good to fail, the group remained cautious. They insisted, "Your word isn't enough. We'll consult Nelson first." One of them poured Tommy a glass of whiskey and demanded he recite a poem before leaving.
Want to hear a poem? What about you, Brainbox?
Seeing that everyone was eager to hear him recite a poem, Tommy sat in his chair, interlocked his fingers, gazed at the ceiling, and closed his eyes. Seeing this, Michael slapped his thigh in satisfaction, clearly pleased to see Tommy humbled. But Tommy simply threw a sample package to Michael and warned one of the men nearby, "Watch out for a guy with a bleeding heart tattoo. He's a traitor." Tommy then walked out of the bar and immediately placed a call to the authorities. He reported, "There's a man named Michael Gray carrying a black case containing 5 kilograms of contraband. He's heading to the docks to board a ship bound for Boston." In this way, Tommy's trap worked perfectly, and Michael was arrested. Because her husband was in prison, Gina finally had a little free time, and she happily danced. But her celebration was cut short when Tommy arrived. He asked Gina to introduce him to her uncle Nelson. Faced with the infamous Tommy Shelby, once the terror of London, Gina looked at him with disdain. She scoffed, "And who do you think you are? A gangster leader trying to meet my uncle?" Tommy was unfazed by Gina's taunts. He calmly replied, "Your husband Michael is in prison because I tipped off the authorities." He continued, "Your uncle Nelson may hold a position of great power, but if he publicly helps a convicted criminal, his political enemies will seize the opportunity to drag him down. He won't risk it, not even for the husband of his favorite niece." Hearing Tommy's reasoning, Gina was furious. She decided to temporarily abandon her efforts to get Michael out of prison, but this outcome was not what Tommy wanted. After leaving Gina's place, Tommy, led by a prison guard, went to visit Michael in his cell. Tommy bluntly told Michael that it was his plan that landed him in prison, then revealed Nelson's upcoming itinerary. Michael, realizing how much Tommy knew, scoffed, "It doesn't matter how much you know. If Nelson doesn't get me out, my wife Gina will stop him from working with you." Tommy, unfazed, handed Michael a letter. This was written by the president's secretary. "He suggests you spend a bit more time in here," he added. According to Nelson's ledger, he's purchased 5 permits to travel to Boston for his wife, his mistress, the president's son, himself, and Gina. Tommy smirked, "And while you're here, I'll take very good care of Gina for you." As Tommy sat in his car, his expression grew somber. His wife Lizzie had just informed him that their daughter Ruby was gravely ill, forced to abandon his business dealings in America. Tommy returned home immediately, but as his house came into view, a slight smile crept across his face. Pushing aside his worry, he embraced his daughter with a warm smile. Tommy then took his family to the hospital for a full checkup. However, as he escorted Ruby into the hospital, his expression darkened again. Over the years, He had already lost 2 family members and countless friends. He couldn't bear the thought of another tragedy. When Lizzie reassured him that Ruby was fine, Tommy finally let out a breath of relief. He promised Lizzie that once the business in America was settled, he would take the family on a relaxing vacation. Then he left for Parliament. Because Tommy is the chairman of the Birmingham Labour Party, he needs to speak regularly. Amidst a chorus of cheers, Tommy strode confidently onto the podium. As the restless crowd buzzed below, he held up a card with the word silence written on it and urged them to calm down. He began his speech. The central theme of Tommy's address was human rights. As he was a staunch supporter of socialism, he opened by sarcastically criticizing the current system, telling the crowd, "No matter how much injustice you endure, you must not complain. Complaining means you're unpatriotic and maybe even a traitor." Then, holding up the silence card once more, he declared, "I refuse to stay silent." With that, he tore the card in half. Tommy's speech ignited the passions of everyone present, but after the meeting ended, Tommy was seen entering a gathering hosted by Mosley, the fascist propagandist. This infuriated the workers, who blocked the entrance, demanding to know why Tommy had betrayed them. Tommy's response was simple. He stated that he was there only to act as a mediator. In truth, Tommy had always been a staunch supporter of socialism. His association with Mosley was purely a strategy to infiltrate the fascist ranks and extract valuable information from within. Mosley, on the other hand, had been busy over the past few years. Not only had he successfully spread fascist ideology across Britain, but he had also married Diana, the daughter of an aristocrat. In both love and career, he was thriving. Tommy's decision to attend the gathering was to inform Mosley that he had established contact with the American tycoon Nelson. He explained that if they could secure Nelson's cooperation, they could channel contraband into the United States continuously. The profits from this venture could then be covertly used to support the growth of fascism. Tommy's apparent support deeply moved Mosley, further solidifying his trust in him. 2 days later, Nelson arranged to meet Tommy in London. The American tycoon was also deeply intrigued by the renowned leader of the Razor Gang. Nelson's question was straightforward. He considered contraband a shady business, one that might bring unnecessary trouble. Tommy countered, "You're in the whiskey business, aren't you? Every year, countless people die from drinking whiskey. Contraband, on the other hand, serves as a sedative for many Puritans and atheists. In essence, they're the same thing. And most importantly, while you may know the President of the United States, I can introduce you to the man in this country who is most fond of wearing formal suits, and I have plenty of information about his secrets in my hands." Hearing this, Nelson quickly understood Tommy's implication. In Britain, the only man who matched that description and could pique Nelson's interest was Churchill. After a moment of thought, Nelson replied that he would seriously consider the deal. Then, he left the church. Meanwhile, at the Shelby family villa, Lizzie found a strange drawing made by her daughter on the table. When Lizzie asked her daughter about it, Ruby told her, "I saw a man in the chimney. He was wearing gray clothes and had green eyes. He kept telling me that someone in our family is going to die." In the previous episode, Tommy met with Jack Nelson and agreed to provide the Nelson gang with information about British politics in exchange for support in running his contraband business in Boston. Due to his daughter's serious illness, Tommy hurried back to his office, preparing to pack his belongings and head home. However, as soon as Tommy opened the door and entered the room, a man in a military uniform pinned him against the desk. The two immediately began to fight. The man who ambushed Tommy was someone he recognized, the first person he had ever killed. That event had occurred during World War I, and Tommy distinctly remembered the man's piercing green eyes. Coincidentally, before Ruby fell ill, she had been repeatedly mentioning seeing a green-eyed man. For his daughter's sake, Tommy was forced to kill the man once again. Tommy snapped out of this hallucination to the sound of urgent knocking on the door. Quickly regaining his senses, he rushed home without delay. When Tommy tried to go upstairs to see his daughter, Lizzie stopped him, saying the doctor had warned them not to approach Ruby as her condition was too fragile. She had been coughing up blood. But Tommy couldn't be dissuaded. He immediately contacted his private doctor, scooped Ruby into his arms, and rushed her to the hospital. Upon arriving, the doctor stopped Tommy, explaining that his daughter had tuberculosis, a highly infectious disease, and he could not stay with her. In 1930, tuberculosis was a gravely serious illness. Though Tommy understood this, he couldn't control his emotions. Deep down, Tommy believed his family's misfortunes were all tied to the curse of the sapphire from years ago. Lizzie, however, refused to entertain such superstitions and comforted Tommy, urging him to get an X-ray test to ensure his own health. When the results came back, it was revealed that aside from Ruby, no one else in the family had been infected. In an era where medical advancements were still limited, tuberculosis was practically a death sentence. Faced with the looming loss of another loved one, Tommy's grief was overwhelming. Still convinced it was the gypsy curse at work, he resolved to find the person who had cast it in order to save his daughter. His brother John's wife, Esme, happened to be a gypsy, so Tommy went to her first. When Esme learned of Tommy's intentions, she took him to a desolate graveyard. She reminded him that 10 years ago, after Grace's death, he had given her sapphire to another woman. That woman had taken the gem back to her village and passed it to her sister, who then gave it to her own daughter. Tragically, that little girl began coughing uncontrollably that same night and died the next day. Esme explained that if anyone had truly cursed Tommy, it would be the mother of that little girl. Standing before the cross bearing the girl's name, Tommy had a sudden realization. He believed that if he could find the girl's mother and convince her to lift the curse, he could save Ruby. Seeing Tommy in his nearly manic state, Esme agreed to help him locate the girl's mother. But when Tommy returned home that evening, Lizzie tearfully told him that Ruby had already passed away.
She's gone to me.
In his grief and fury, Tommy struck his brother Arthur hard across the face. Since Aunt Polly's death, Arthur had been living in a daze, numbing himself with alcohol and contraband, completely neglecting the family's affairs. Tommy's slap today was to wake Arthur up. Tommy's goal was simple. With Ruby's death, he now needed to focus on arranging her funeral. Yet, at this exact moment, Tommy discovered that some members of the family had been stealing his goods. He needed Arthur to help handle these matters, and Tommy promised Arthur that he would help him reunite with his wife, Linda. After being slapped by Tommy, Arthur finally snapped out of it. He fixed his hair, put on his flat cap, and led his men to a warehouse where goods were stored, successfully catching the thief. What Arthur didn't expect, however, was that the ringleader, Stag, showed no signs of remorse and instead tried to talk him down.
But look at me as a man you can be.
You've tried Jesus, yeah?
Yeah, he looked you up and down and he shook his head. Don't count the days. It's futile. You get to 100 and then you wake up and it's fucking one again.
Oh, just give me the word of do it!
As he listened to his men's angry shouts, Arthur pushed him aside. Perhaps Stag's words truly struck a chord within Arthur. In an uncharacteristic move, the usually brutal Arthur Shelby decided to spare the thief. He turned around and left the warehouse with his men. In the winter of 1934, the streets of Birmingham, England's second largest city, would normally have been bustling with activity. But on this day, due to a special funeral, people stayed behind closed doors, afraid to invite trouble. The funeral was being held by none other than the Shelby family, the underground rulers of Birmingham. Today, they were laying to rest Ruby, the daughter of their leader, Tommy Shelby. As the flower carriage reached its destination, Tommy stepped forward and spoke to the gathered mourners. He explained that he had originally planned to buy a golden carriage, but Ruby had never cared for such things. She loved horses and boating, and that was why he chose this place. Tommy then made a vow in Ruby's name. From this day forward, the Shelby family would dedicate substantial funds to charity until the family ceased to exist. Hearing his wife's sobs, Tommy gently consoled her. He helped Lizzie onto the carriage, allowing her one last look at their daughter.
The devils who did this will pay, Ruby.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
When Lizzie asked him questions, Tommy did not respond. Instead, he stepped off the carriage and embraced his son. Lizzie seemed to sense what Tommy was about to do. She pleaded with him to stop, but her words were futile. Tommy had already resolved to act. He broke away from his wife and left the funeral. In a secluded forest, two women were cooking when the sound of a car pulling up broke the silence. The older woman asked her daughter if it might be the police, but the scene shifted to reveal a man in a flat cap approaching. After killing all the adults, Tommy let the children go. He had finally avenged his daughter, and in that moment, all the grief he had suppressed erupted. If only he hadn't acted so impulsively in the past, Grace and Ruby might both still be alive today. After calming himself, Tommy met with Esme. He handed her a bag of gold dust, saying it was her payment for finding the person. Esme didn't leave immediately. Instead, she looked out the window at a carriage and told Tommy a story. She explained that during the war, Tommy had once slept with a girl. Later, Esme ran into this girl at a market. The girl had been pregnant at the time, but her family wouldn't let her keep the child. She rented a small room where she secretly gave birth to a baby boy. Tragically, due to poor sanitation, the girl passed away a few years later. Esme recounted how she found the boy stealing at a fairground and decided to take him in. raising him as her own ever since. She concluded by telling Tommy that while he had lost a daughter, fate had returned a son to him. Perhaps this boy could one day carry on the Shelby legacy. A rare high-level meeting took place, representing the American president. Jack Nelson was in attendance, as was the leader of the Irish Republican Army and Oswald Mosley, the most prominent fascist leader in Britain. They gathered together for one purpose: Tommy Shelby, the leader of the Razor Gang. To prove that Tommy could be trusted, Mosley made a signature gesture. Though outwardly a follower of Mosley, Tommy was secretly a staunch supporter of socialism. But to infiltrate the fascist ranks, Tommy had no choice but to play along. After seeing Tommy express his loyalty, Nelson was the first to speak. He agreed to Tommy's contraband trade to the United States and promised to supply weapons to the IRA so they could continue creating tension. Mosley then mentioned that he would soon be traveling to Berlin to meet an important figure. While he was away, he wanted Tommy to use his local influence to deal with some protesters. It was clear that Mosley's request was also the primary reason the other two had come to him. Tommy carefully noted down all the information discussed during the meeting, and as soon as it ended, he printed everything out. Lizzie, seeing how exhausted her husband looked, was deeply concerned. She urged Tommy to take a rest, but Tommy explained, "I need to finish this immediately." This information was crucial for Churchill. Afterward, Tommy headed to a narrow alley. Once he saw a man leave, he entered the house. The woman who opened the door was none other than Gina, his brother Michael's wife. Caught red-handed, Gina panicked and didn't know what to say. Tommy, however, got straight to the point. "I know you don't care about Michael's feelings. It doesn't matter to me, we're already at odds. I won't tell him, but if your Uncle Nelson finds out that his favorite niece has been sleeping with his business partner, he'll be furious. So, if you want me to keep this secret, you'll accompany Mosley to Berlin in a few days. He'll be meeting an important figure, and you'll tell me everything they discuss." When Tommy returned home, his private doctor, Halford, was waiting for him. Halford informed him that although his x-rays from 10 days ago showed no signs of tuberculosis, there was a shadow on his skull. Based on their findings, it was likely a tuberculoma. He further explained that the likely cause was Tommy contracting it from his daughter. With a tuberculoma growing in his brain, Tommy realized his time was limited. Determined to secure his family's future, he walked into a tea house carrying a briefcase. He placed the briefcase on a chair and opened it, revealing a ticking bomb inside. Then he ordered a cup of green tea and told the owner, "I heard my brother often comes here to use contraband. I'm giving you 4 minutes to hand over every illegal substance in this place, or I'll blow it up." The owner, visibly shaken, rushed to the storage room and brought out all the remaining contraband. As Tommy left, a woman whispered to the owner, "I told you he was bluffing. The bomb is definitely fake." But in the next moment, the briefcase Tommy had tossed into the water exploded. Tommy then met with the chief superintendent, ordering him to crack down on bars and gambling dens in Birmingham. He warned, "If I ever find another place where my brother can use contraband, I'll blow up every single establishment." After resolving the issue with his brother, Tommy summoned the Shelby family's core members for a meeting. He introduced a young boy to the group and announced, "This is my illegitimate son." Tommy explained, "Duke's mother passed away unexpectedly, and my daughter Ruby died just a few days ago. That's why I've brought Duke into the family. Moreover, they genuinely needed manpower at this time." Tommy then asked his brother Arthur to take Duke to get him acquainted with the family business.
There you go. Shelby breakfast for you, son.
I don't drink. And I'm not Shelby. I'm a Duke.
At this moment, Finn walked up to Arthur and said, "There's a referee who's refusing to obey our orders and refuses to rig the match. He's not even afraid of threats." Seeing that he had just resumed managing the business and encountered such a thing, Arthur was a little angry. He immediately took some men and confronted the referee. Seeing the man in charge arrive, referee Wilfred said to Arthur, "That guy just pointed a gun at me. Once I leave, I'm going straight to the police." Arthur smirked slightly and instructed Finn to call the police. Then he turned to Wilfred and said, "Ask the chief superintendent if he's there." Arthur produced a ledger, showing it to Wilfred. "These are the debts owed by the chief superintendent. He's made a fortune with our help. And now you're refusing to rig the match? You're cutting off his money." At that moment, Billy stepped forward and said to Wilfred, "There's a match this Saturday afternoon. In the final minute, you'll blow the whistle and award Birmingham a penalty kick. If you do this, you'll receive a generous payment." Seeing Wilfred's attitude remain so defiant, Arthur lost his patience. Finn quickly suggested, "Let's call Tommy about this." But Arthur refused outright, saying, "I'll handle this myself." He then restrained Wilfred, grabbing Billy by the collar. Arthur said, "You've been part of this family for long enough. It's time you got your hands dirty." Wilfred's screams echoed through the room, and soon he stopped breathing. Arthur looked at the blood-soaked Billy and coldly said, "Now, just like us, you'll never make it to heaven." In the bathhouse, Nelson tightly bound Billy's weak spot with steel cables and said, "You're part of the Shelby family, aren't you? But from now on, I'm your new boss." As Billy begged for mercy, Nelson watched in satisfaction. Nelson assured him, "As long as Arthur Shelby is dead, I'll spare you." He patted Billy's face before leaving the bathhouse, leaving Billy wailing in agony. Billy had always been a spy planted by the IRA, something Tommy had known all along. Now that Billy had also become Nelson's pawn, Tommy saw an opportunity to eliminate them all in one decisive strike. During a family meeting, Tommy announced that he planned to travel to Miquelon Island to collect a payment. He instructed the younger members to head to his villa and dispose of the bodies buried in the yard since he had already sold the property to a developer. After setting the trap for Billy, Tommy returned to his office. Arthur pulled out a CT scan and a medical report, saying, "I stole the key to your safe when you weren't paying attention. I didn't expect to find out you've got a tumor in your head." Tommy told Arthur to keep this a secret. He assured Arthur that when the time came, he would take care of his own departure. He also revealed that he had partnered with the housing minister to develop a plot of land worth £10 million.
Because for most of the people who are close to me, that is what I am!
Hearing his brother say this, Arthur was very sad. He grabbed Tommy and started grappling with him at the desk. In the end, he was out of strength and Tommy broke free. Seeing his brother so downcast, Tommy said to Arthur, "Before I go, I'll make sure to give you one last call." Arthur wasn't comforted. He poured a glass of whiskey and then looked at the oil painting of John on the wall and wept. He didn't understand why fate was so unfair, and both of his younger brothers had to leave him one after the other. Tommy watched his grieving brother and softly tried to comfort him. He held Arthur tightly in his arms, embracing the warmth that would soon be gone. Through a stormy night sky, an airplane cut through thick clouds. On board sat none other than the legendary Tommy Shelby. With a tumor in his brain, Tommy had devised a plan to eliminate all his enemies in one final move, ensuring his family would continue to live in wealth after his death. His destination was the cold and desolate Miquelon Island. Meanwhile, Michael, freshly out of prison, arrived at Miquelon Island ahead of Tommy. He had prepared a bomb to greet his dear brother. Meanwhile, the other family members were at Tommy's villa, tasked with disposing of the bodies buried in the yard. In the empty hall, Tommy's son, Duke, entered with a machine gun and sprayed the area in a sweeping motion. Finn, already annoyed by Duke's presence in the family, scolded him. "You should focus on finishing Tommy's task first," he said. But Duke insisted, "We should wait until all the bodies are buried before digging again." They then tied Billy up. Duke handed Finn a revolver and ordered him to kill Billy, explaining, "This man is a spy planted in our family." Billy tipped off the IRA leader about Uncle Arthur's location at the bar. Right now, Arthur is waiting for them there. Arthur knows you're close to Billy, so this shot has to come from you. If you don't do it, you're out of the Shelby family.
You are no longer a member of this Shelby family.
I'll come for you!
At the bar, Captain Swing arrived with the IRA, only to find it completely empty. Arthur emerged from the shadows, pressing a gun against Captain Swing's back, and forced them to walk outside the bar. But Captain Swing had stationed snipers outside, and the situation quickly turned against Arthur. With no other choice, Arthur threw a gas grenade, using the cover to take out the snipers. He then confronted Captain Swing, avenging Aunt Polly's death. On Miquelon Island, Tommy finally met with Michael. They completed their business transaction without issue, but just as they were getting into the car to leave, Michael said he had forgotten his cigarettes and went back inside. Tommy had to get into the car first. Inside, Michael poured himself a drink and waited patiently, as if anticipating something. When the dust settled, Michael removed the cigarette from his lips, murmured, "Mom, I've avenged you," and strode out of the bar. However, as he stepped out of the bar, he was met by Tommy, pointing a gun at him. It turned out that the island's chief constable was one of Tommy's old comrades, and he had informed Tommy of Michael's plan to plant a bomb. Tommy hadn't exposed Michael immediately because he needed a solid justification to kill him. After all, Michael was his aunt's son.
You killed her.
Well, it was half of me. Still visits me in my dreams. She'll visit me no more. I have no limitations.
As the explosion echoed behind him, Tommy didn't look back. The villa held no memories worth preserving. After destroying the symbolic house, Tommy gathered the family. He announced that he would be stepping away for a while and that Ada would take over family affairs. Ada, shocked that her brother was giving her such authority, had no idea that by stepping away, Tommy meant his own death. When Tommy asked why Arthur wasn't present, Linda read a letter from him aloud. The letter read, "I will soon follow in your footsteps. The place you are going is my other shore." Tommy knew only Arthur could have discovered his illness. Despite his efforts to stay composed, he couldn't stop the tears from falling. After saying his final goodbyes to each family member, Tommy went to a grassy field. He flipped a coin for the last time in his life. When the coin showed heads, he knew the time had come. He stepped into the carriage and removed all the jewelry he was wearing. Inside, the carriage was filled with photographs of his family members, because when a gypsy dies, his body needs to be placed in a flower carriage for cremation. So this is what Tommy prepared for himself. He smoked one last cigarette, loaded his gun, and slowly pointed it at his head. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, he heard a familiar voice. He quickly jumped off the carriage and ran forward, and coming toward him was none other than his deceased daughter, Ruby. Tommy held Ruby tightly and asked, "Did Polly send you?" He thought he was already dead, but Ruby told him, "Daddy, you're not sick. If you don't believe me, light the fire, and you'll see the truth." Listening to his daughter, Tommy had no choice but to follow her advice. But just as he was about to use the newspaper to light the fire, he suddenly saw something. The newspaper featured a photo of Mosley's wedding. In the list of attendees was a name he knew all too well: his private doctor, Halford, the one who had diagnosed him with the tumor. At that moment, Tommy realized the truth. He quickly returned to town and captured Halford.
I'm guessing you people all decided that the only person who could ever kill Thomas Shelby is Thomas Shelby himself.
With that, Peaky Blinders has come to an end. Feel free to follow me for more exciting content on my homepage, and I look forward to your continued viewing.